Hey guys, Starks here. Today's video is going to be talking about arrow length. What are we looking for in arrow length? What are our goals? What are the differences? Things like that. So what I've got is I've got two different arrow lengths today. Both of these are 500 spine. One of them, the short one here, from the back of the point to the throat of the nock is 30 1/8 inches. 75 grain insert, 100 grain point, for a total of 447 grains. Now my last video I talked about grains per pound of pull. Through Black Widow's website, and I'll show you that bow here in a minute, I have to have at least 8 grains per pound of pull to keep from voiding their warranty. They recommend at least 9 to 11. So this arrow comes in at 9.71. Totally safe to shoot through their setup. The second arrow I've got, a little bit longer. The back of the point to the throat of the nock is 34 11/16. This is a full length arrow that has not been cut down. Comes with a standard insert, 14 grains, 100 grain point, 431 grains. Comes up to 9.36 grains per pound of pull. To give you an idea, this arrow here is already 16 grains heavier than the long arrow. All right, shooting those today we'll be using my Black Widow PMAX. This is a 64-inch bow, 46 at 30 pounds. Excuse me, 46 pounds at 30 inches. That's my draw length. So that short arrow you're going to see, it's really going to almost come back into this riser. It's going to be just barely sticking out. So what we're going to talk about today is the actual arrow length. What are my point-ons going to be? My goal today is to get both of these arrows to hit point-on at the same distance. And we're going to see how much more weight I have to add to this little one to get it there. Then we're going to talk about trajectories, the arcs, FOC for you hunters. We're going to talk about the difference between setting up a hunting arrow and a tournament style arrow. So stay tuned. We're going to do some shooting, then we're going to come back and talk about what we see. All right guys, first up I'm going to shoot the long arrows. I'm going to shoot a group. When you're tuning, never chase one single arrow. Always shoot a group. Gives you a good basis to tune on. So, and just a disclaimer, these arrows are not tuned to this bow. I'm only worried about the up and down. We're going to get different horizontal measurements as well, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. So let's shoot a group of these long arrows. Not too bad. All right, now for these shorties. Now let's go talk about our results now. Okay guys, let's talk about our results here, and they may be just a little misleading. This is our group of 34-inch arrows. This is our 30-inch arrows. Pretty strong groups for what they are, especially not being tuned for that bow. My 30-inch arrows, I was aiming right here. Okay, so let's measure that difference roughly. We're going to measure from the middle of our group. I'm gonna call it right there. We'll just do it this way. So we're looking at somewhere around 7 inches. So that would be my gap, a 7-inch gap with these arrows at 25 yards. Now, if I'm shooting, especially 3D competition, I may put a little more weight in those, get them down, point on at 25 is where I like to be. If you're looking at this group here, you may think that's not too far off from that one, but here's the reality of it. I knew what they were going to do, so my aim point for this group was actually this hole down here. So if you notice, they did go more to the right. It's because they're a little stiffer. Shorter arrows, same spine, shorter arrows, kind of close to the same weight up front. They're going to be quite a bit stiffer, okay? So these arrows now, in the middle of their group, has about a 20.5 inch gap. So 4 inches arrow length equaled 13 inches difference in gap down here. So what we're going to do, we're going to keep adding weight to these so I can get them in this group at the same aim point. We're going to see what the difference is, and then we're going to talk about the difference in weight versus length of these arrows when you're looking at 3D tournaments or even hunting. So let's go back. We're going to add some more weight, shoot a little more. Okay guys, I pulled the 100 grain points out of the short arrows. I put 175s in them, so I've gained 75 grains on the front of those arrows. Let's see if we can get them in the same group as these just yet. And again, that's the reason we shoot groups, guys, especially with a trad bow. One that's not tuned for these arrows, or these arrows are not tuned for it. I maybe have a little variance down there where I'm hitting. There you go, good group. All right, now I'm gonna use the same lower aim point that I did before on these, just to make sure that I'm not shooting over the target. Well, that brought them down quite a bit. Going to go ahead and finish this group out, and we may reshoot these. Maybe not. That first shot might have been a weak one. All right, let's go check that group out. All right, guys, so our groups this time, I aimed at the same place. You can see it did bring these down quite a bit to where they are. So we're going to measure these off again. I may leave these in as a good test. I felt good about those 3 shots. We're still going to be around that 7-inch mark. And our group over, guys, is about 3 inches over. Now, we talked about arrow spine. That's where this plays in. I've got a little outside anchor that I use. The arrows are a little stiffer. Being stiffer, what I mean is they're not going to bend as much. So when you're shooting off that shelf and they're stiffer, they're not going to bend as much, so they're going to continue to kind of go left just a little bit. A really weak arrow for a right-handed shooter would overbend and it would go to the right. So that's kind of a telltale. This is going to reinforce that. So my aim point here over, they're in line. So this group's about 8 inches over. So again, a shorter arrow, even though the same spine, is going to be quite a bit stiffer. A while ago, this one was 20.5. Now it's probably around 12. So to the middle of that group. So 75 grains on the front end of these arrows, drop them about 8 inches, ballpark. That'll play a big factor in here in a minute when we get these when they're in the same group. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to drop 2 25s in the front of them, see where they go. And what I'm trying to do is get where I can aim them both off here. I'm going to leave this group here for a test. I'm not going to reshoot them. That's a pretty good solid group there. So let me go put some more weight on these points. We'll reshoot the short ones and see what we got. All right, guys. So on those short arrows, I dropped the 175 grain points that I had in front of them. We put 225 grain points in front of them. So that's 125 more than what we started with. I think I'm confident now I can aim at the same place. Let's see how they react compared to the other arrows. Not a bad group. So let's go down and check them out. All right, guys, we've managed to get about the same height here, which is about 7 inches from here to the middle of our group. These three are our 34-inch. These three are our 30-inch. Those are both pretty good groups at 25 yards. But the difference in right to left on them is about 2 inches, 2 or 3 inches. So, as a matter of fact, got a tape over here. So 3 on the front ones, yeah, 5.5 on the second ones. So this is where our spine comes in. Same spine arrows when you buy them. The shorter you cut those arrows, the stiffer they get. The more stiff, if you're a right-handed archer, the farther left they get. If you're a left-handed archer, they go right. So I've got these two arrows where they're hitting the same plane, in the same vertical plane here. So the short ones are still stiff for that setup. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back. We're not gonna worry about the stiffness, but I'm gonna shoot a couple at 20 yards. So that's gonna be a 5 yards difference. And we're gonna see what the results give us there. Hey guys, so here's the setup. We're gonna shoot these at 20 yards, 2 totally different groups. I'm gonna aim at the same place. They're gonna be a little higher when they hit the target. I wanna see what that difference is between the 2 sets of arrows with just 5 yards difference in distance. That's a pretty good group on the long arrows. Now let's try these short ones. And remember, at 25 yards, they were in the same group, just a little left and right of each other. Let's see if that holds true at 20 yards. Two good groups, guys. Let's go down there and look at them. I think you're going to be kind of surprised with the results. All right, guys, we got back down here at the bell, and this is what I wanted to show you. There's a significant weight difference in these two arrows. We'll measure all that in a minute. I'll get you good numbers so we can see exactly what it is. But we're going to look at what these arrows did in 5 yards. They were both about 7 inches off of this mark right here. At 25 yards, we moved in 5 yards to 20. That means if I'm a 3D shooter, I need to be aiming lower. That's going to be my gap. So we're going to see what this gap did on these two arrow setups. On the 34-inch arrow, that went from 7 inches to about 8 inches in the middle of that group. So at 5 yards, these arrows had 1 inch of drop. Pretty good. If I'm a 3D shooter, I'm happy with that, knowing that 25 or 20, I can hold point on and still be in the 10. That is huge to me in my setups as a tournament shooter. These arrows, remember they were at 7. When we come back here, or when we were at 25, we're gonna measure those. The middle of that group is 13.5. So these arrows in that last 5 yards would have dropped 6.5 inches instead of an inch. Both of them flew good at 25. So when you're setting up your bows, if you're setting up a 3D bow, and I understand that a lot of guys want to run the same arrows they hunt with. They like that heavy FOC. They like their arrows fly like that. Nothing wrong with that, guys. But if you're just new getting into the sport, or if you're wanting to learn how to tune your bows a little better, to be a little more forgiving, think about going with a longer arrow as opposed to a heavier arrow. You're going to be more forgiving downrange. And what I mean by that, if I look at a target and I say that's 20 yards and it's actually 23 yards, this arrow is still going to be in that 10 ring if I aim right, if I do my gap right. This arrow will drop out and probably be a 5. So that one lapse of yardage could drop me 5 points. So just food for thought there on your arrow tunes. We're going to go back, we're going to weigh both of these arrows, see what they turned out to be. We're going to give you the grains per pound of pull, and we're going to talk about how much energy it took these bows to shoot these 2 different arrows. Okay guys, let's talk about some numbers real quick. Now for a little refresher, the 34-inch 500 spine arrows were 431 grain at 9.36 grains per pound of pull. That means I've got a 46-pound bow, so 9.36 grains per pound of pull for my bow. These short arrows, they started out at 447 grains, which is 9.7. So even before we started adding weight to these, it took more energy to move this arrow than this arrow, even though it was shorter. Now the reason is we put an insert in there because I knew they were going to be quite a bit higher, because that helps with the aiming process. Okay, we'll talk about that here in just a second. When we finished up with this arrow and got it in the same group at 25 yards, it ended up weighing 570 grains at 12.39 grains per pound of pull. So 3 grains more per pound than the long arrows. So it takes quite a bit more energy to shoot this arrow than it does the long arrow. And I think sometimes there's a myth at it that the shorter that arrow is, the lighter it is, the more it zips. That's not necessarily true when you're aiming off the arrow. Now, if you're a compound guy trying to get it, you've got your own sights or whatever, yes, that is true. You're going to get more speed out of them. But when you are aiming off of this arrow tip, okay, and I'm talking more specifically now to the gap shooters or to the split vision shooters, your instinctive guys, may not pertain to you as much. But when I'm aiming at using the point of my arrow as opposed to the point of this arrow has to be so much lower than this one at distance. And what I mean by that, the long arrow at 25 yards, I was point on, I was putting my arrow point there. This arrow at 25 with the same weight, or with the weight it is now, same thing. They were grouping really well together. When I backed up to, or when I moved up to 20, this arrow, I would have had to aim an inch low to hit the same spot. This arrow, I would have had to aim 6.5 inches low to hit the same spot. At 15 or 10, that would have been magnified. So at this arrow, maybe at 15 yards, you've been aiming 6 inches down. This arrow would probably been 18 inches or so down. So when you're setting your bows up, don't think that just because your draw length is a certain length, you have to cut your arrows back. Take the time, shoot, go to your range, go to your backyard, whatever you need to do. Shoot and get where you want your arrows to be point on it. The ASA this year, I'm shooting 3D a lot. It is a 25-yard max distance. I'm gonna set my arrows up at 25 yards, point on. That way I know if I look up and go, I think that's 22, and it's 25, I've only lost about an inch in there. This arrow, if I'm setting point on up with a short, heavy arrow, and I miss it by a couple yards, this thing's gonna drop 3 or 4 inches. can mean a lot of points in a 3D tournament at the end of the season. If you are setting up for hunting and you're looking at a certain weight arrow, 600 grain or 650 grain or whatever that is, leave that length on those arrows, put your weight up front, and start shooting and backing off and see where you land on where you want to be point on. A lot of those trad guys like to be 20 yards point on or so. If you're trying to get this one 20 yards point on, you're going to have to stack a lot more weight in the front to get that arrow down. Or if you left just a little bit of length, you could have been there a little easier. So food for thought, things to think about where you're getting bow set up. Think about your application. Think about where you want your point on at or your max distance. And then think about how you're aiming with that bow. If you notice on me, I've got a 30-inch draw. This arrow, 30 1/8 or whatever this thing is, this is right back on my shelf. This is as short as I can get them. And I've got a very high anchor to help shorten that gap. This arrow, I'm gonna tell you from experience, with 150 grains up front, if I anchor here, this arrow point on is about 45 yards for me. This arrow's closer to 30 yards. So know your equipment. Guys, thanks for joining us on this video. Like, share, comment on these videos. Tell me if there's something you want to know about, something maybe product reviews you want me to do, whatever it is that you're curious about on traditional archery. If you've seen something in this setup you don't quite understand or you need more information on, feel free to reach out. Thanks for everything, guys, and I'll see you down the road.